At 5:17 local time, the Strait of Hormuz was still half covered in darkness when the first contact appeared on the carrier's surface search radar. Then came a second, then a third. Inside the Tactical Information Center, blue light from the displays reflected across the faces of sailors who had already been awake for hours. No one needed to raise their voice. The screen was telling the story clearly enough. New surface contact bearing 074, range 12 nautical miles. A short pause. Second contact bearing 118, range 13 nautical miles. Then another report came from the starboard side. Multiple contacts developing, 6 total. On the main display, the carrier sat at the center of the picture, a massive American presence moving through one of the narrowest and most closely watched waterways on the planet. Around it, 6 small tracks began forming a pattern that every experienced watch officer knew was not routine. They were not passing randomly. They were not simply observing from a distance. They were shaping the water around the carrier. The officer of the deck looked toward the captain. The captain stood still for a moment, one hand resting on the rail, eyes fixed on the tactical feed as report after report came in. Contacts maintaining speed, contacts adjusting course, portside contacts turning inward, starboard contacts matching our heading. Outside, the carrier's flight deck stretched into the dark, damp with sea mist, and lit by red and amber deck lights. Fighter aircraft sat secured along the edge of the deck. Sailors in colored jerseys moved between them with practiced precision, their helmets catching the glow from the island's superstructure. The ship was not in a routine moment anymore. At 5:19, the first bridge-to-bridge call went out. Unidentified surface vessels, this is a United States Navy vessel operating in international waters. Maintain safe distance and state your intentions. Only static came back. The 6 radar tracks continued closing. The nearest contact was now under 10 nautical miles away. On the port bow, 2 Iranian naval vessels moved in parallel, their wakes cutting pale lines through the dark water. Farther out, a third ship angled across the carrier's projected path. On the starboard side, 2 more held position just outside the formation, close enough to apply pressure, far enough to avoid making their purpose obvious. Behind the carrier, the 6th contact held its place like a door slowly closing. It was not a full circle yet, but it was becoming one. In the Tactical Information Center, the Surface Warfare Coordinator leaned over his console. Closest point of approach is decreasing, projected under 4 nautical miles if they hold course. The captain finally spoke. Maintain course. Log everything. No sudden turn, no dramatic acceleration, no panic. That was the first answer. The carrier did not flinch. A second warning went out, slower and clearer this time. Iranian naval vessels. This is a United States Navy vessel. You are maneuvering unsafely near a U.S. aircraft carrier. Alter course immediately. Again, there was no answer, no acknowledgement, no explanation. Just 6 ships closing in disciplined silence. At 5:21, the carrier's escorts began to move. A U.S. destroyer on the starboard quarter adjusted heading first, sliding outward from the formation with quiet precision. Its radar arrays were already sweeping. Its bridge crew had the Iranian contacts in visual range now, dark hulls rising and falling against the low horizon. Another escort shifted behind the carrier, widening the protective screen. The carrier itself remained steady, a floating airbase of steel and power, still moving forward through the strait as if the pressure around it did not exist. But every system on board was awake now. Long-range cameras rotated toward the closest Iranian vessel. Electronic support equipment began recording every signal in the air. The carrier's air department received the alert. On deck, a Seahawk helicopter was pulled into position, its rotor blades still folded, its crew already moving around it. Inside the tactical center, the picture sharpened. Contact 1 holding 8.7 nautical miles. Contact 2 increasing speed. Contact 3 crossing forward sector. Contacts 4 and 5 maintaining starboard pressure. Contact 6 closing from the aft quarter. The pattern was unmistakable now. The Iranian ships were not simply near the carrier, they were building a box around it. At 5:23, the first line of daylight cut across the water. For a moment, the entire scene became visible from the carrier's island. 6 Iranian naval vessels spread across the sea like dark blades, all angled toward the American formation. One sailor on the bridge lifted binoculars and locked onto the closest ship. Visual contact. Iranian flag confirmed. Tactically, that changed nothing, but it made the moment feel real. On the flight deck, sailors looked toward the horizon. They could not see the whole formation from where they stood, but they could feel the change inside the ship. The deck announcements became shorter, movements became sharper. The air carried that heavy quiet that comes before important decisions are made. At 5:24, the closest Iranian vessel shifted again. Only a few degrees, not enough to call it a direct move. Too much to ignore. The projected line on the American display cut closer across the carrier's bow. The ring was tightening. The captain watched the track for 3 seconds, then 4, then 5. Set defensive condition, he said. No escalation unless ordered. Continue recording. Across the formation, the U.S. Navy responded without raising its voice. Escorts widened, sensors locked on, cameras tracked, radio stayed open. Every Iranian ship was assigned a number. Every turn was time-stamped. Every mile of closing distance was written into the record. The carrier kept moving. The 6 Iranian vessels kept closing. And in the narrow waters of Hormuz, at 5:24 in the morning, the situation crossed a line that no one could see on a map. The U.S. carrier was no longer just being watched. It was being surrounded. At 5:25, the carrier held course. That was the first decision that mattered. 6 Iranian naval vessels were now moving around the American formation, close enough to limit its options, but still far enough to hide behind the language of maneuvering. Nothing had been launched, no systems had been visibly directed at the carrier, no commander on the Iranian side had declared dangerous intent. But at sea, intent does not always need words. It has heading, it has speed, it has distance. Inside the tactical center, the carrier's display showed the problem in clean, unforgiving geometry. 3 Iranian vessels were forward of the carrier's track. 2 were pressing from the starboard side. 1 remained aft, holding a position that made the formation look less like a patrol and more like a closing gate. Forward contacts adjusting inward, the coordinator reported. The captain did not answer immediately. He watched the screen, then looked toward the officer of the deck. Maintain course and speed. Outside, dawn spread across the water in a thin gray line, revealing the shape of the nearest Iranian hulls through the morning haze. Their wakes were white and sharp. They were not drifting. They were not wandering. They were coordinated. At 5:26, another formal warning went out. Iranian naval vessels. This is a United States Navy vessel conducting lawful transit. You are closing a U.S. aircraft carrier at an unsafe distance. Alter course immediately. The transmission was repeated on the International Maritime Calling Frequency, then again on a military channel, then in Farsi. No reply, only static. On the bridge, the silence mattered more than any insult could have. A harsh radio call can be logged, translated, and answered. Silence leaves only movement, and the movement was getting worse. Contact 2 increasing speed, a radar operator called from the tactical center. Now 24 knots. A few seconds later, another report followed. Contact 4 matching our turn rate. The captain's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. Bring the screen out. The order moved through the formation instantly. On the carrier's starboard quarter, a U.S. destroyer began sliding outward, placing itself between the carrier and the 2 Iranian vessels pressing from that side. The movement was controlled, not reckless. Its wake widened behind it as it took position like a shield being drawn across the carrier's flank. A second escort adjusted aft, watching the Iranian ship behind the formation. No one shouted, no one overreacted. But the message was visible from miles away. The carrier was not alone. At 5:27, the Iranian ships answered without speaking. One of the forward vessels turned 5 degrees inward. 5 degrees means almost nothing to someone watching from shore. At sea, 5 degrees can decide whether 2 large ships pass safely or create a crisis. Closest point of approach now, 3.6 nautical miles, the tactical center reported. Forward contact remains on crossing line. That number mattered. Every bridge crew watches it when steel is moving towards steel. 3.6 nautical miles was not immediate danger range. Not yet. But for a carrier group moving through restricted waters, surrounded by 6 armed naval vessels, it was too close to ignore and too deliberate to dismiss. The air boss received the next order. Prepare Seahawk for launch. On the flight deck, quiet turned into motion. Deck crew moved around the helicopter with disciplined speed. Rotor blades unfolded. A pilot climbed into the cockpit. The sensor operator checked the forward-looking infrared system. A crew chief leaned into the noise and gave a hand signal under the glow of deck lights. The Seahawk was not being launched to strike. It was being launched to see and to be seen. Inside the carrier, electronic support teams began collecting everything the Iranian ships were giving off. Radar sweeps, navigation signals, communication bursts, short pulses that appeared and vanished. None of it was treated as background noise. Every signal became evidence. At 5:28, one of the Iranian vessels activated a stronger surface search radar. A warning appeared at an electronic warfare console. New emission bearing 086. Iranian surface search profile. Low power. The electronic warfare officer looked up. They're painting the formation, not a full targeting lock. Not yet. But it was no longer passive observation. The Iranian ship was actively measuring the American formation, tracking its course, speed, and spacing. The captain heard the report and gave the next order, record and classify. No counteraction. That restraint was deliberate. The U.S. Navy could have answered electronically. It could have filled the air with interference. It could have made the Iranian system struggle to read the picture clearly. But doing that too early might give Iran the escalation it was trying to provoke. So the Americans waited. They watched. They documented. At 5:29, the Seahawk lifted from the carrier's deck. Its rotors turned the sea air into a violent blur. Spray lifted near the deck edge. The helicopter rose above the island, banked left, and moved toward the forward Iranian ships. From above, the picture was clearer. 6 Iranian naval vessels were spread around the American formation in a rough crescent, but the crescent was bending inward. The lead ships created pressure ahead. The side ships narrowed the carrier's room to maneuver. The aft ship held far enough back to complete the shape. It was not a perfect circle. It did not need to be. The Seahawk leveled at low altitude and opened its warning broadcast. Iranian naval vessels, this is a United States Navy aircraft. You are maneuvering unsafely near a U.S. carrier group. Alter course and increase separation immediately. The message went out clean. The Iranian ships continued moving. No reply. The helicopter repeated the warning in Farsi. Still nothing. At 5:30, the starboard U.S. destroyer rotated its forward mount a few degrees. Not enough to point directly, but enough to be seen. That was the language of naval pressure. No shouting, no warning display, just steel moving with purpose. On the Iranian side, deck crews were visible now through long-range optics. Men stood near railings. A few moved near covered equipment. No systems were fully manned, but the posture was no longer casual. Forward contact still closing, the tactical center reported. Range 5.8 nautical miles from carrier, 3.1 from escort. The destroyer continued outward, placing more American steel between the Iranian ship and the carrier's bow. For the first time, the Iranian formation had to make a choice. Keep tightening the ring and risk direct confrontation with the escort, or adjust. At 5:31, the closest Iranian vessel held course. The captain looked at the tactical display one more time. Then he gave the order that changed the tone of the morning. Bring air defense stations to readiness. Keep systems under strict control. We are not escalating first. Across the group, consoles changed status. Watch teams leaned forward. Defensive systems remained controlled, but ready. Cameras zoomed, radar tracks refined. The Seahawk circled low over the water, its sensors fixed on the Iranian lead ship. The first warning had gone unanswered. The second had gone unanswered. And now every Iranian ship in the ring had a number, a track, and a solution inside the U.S. Navy's defensive system. At 5:32, a warning tone sounded from the electronic warfare console. Not loud, not dramatic, just sharp enough to make every person in the tactical center pause for half a second. New emission, the electronic warfare officer called, bearing 081. The captain turned his head. The officer checked the signal again, eyes narrowed. Possible targeting radar. Short duration. Iranian contact 3. The room changed immediately. Until that moment, the Iranian vessels had been dangerous because of their movement, their speed, their formation, and their refusal to answer. But this was different. This was the kind of radar profile used to prepare a precise solution. It lasted only seconds. Then it vanished. But seconds were enough. Confirm classification, the captain said. Signal matches targeting profile. Intermittent, not continuous. Not a full lock, not yet. But the line had moved. On the tactical display, Contact 3 was forward of the carrier's projected path, angled inward, holding speed just above 22 knots. Its wake stretched behind it like a white scar on the dark water. From the outside, it looked like one ship among 6. Inside the American system, it had just become the center of the morning. The captain's voice stayed calm. Set condition 1 for air defense. Systems tight, record all emissions. The order moved through the carrier like current through steel. In the tactical center, operators leaned closer to their screens. On the bridge, binoculars fixed on the forward Iranian vessel. On the flight deck, crews moved with more urgency but without wasted motion. The carrier still held course. That mattered. If it turned away now, the Iranian formation could claim pressure had worked. If it turned toward them, the risk of escalation would rise. So the U.S. Navy chose the hardest option. It stayed steady. At 5:33, the final warning of that phase went out. Iranian naval vessel bearing 081, this is United States Navy vessel. Your radar emissions and unsafe maneuvering are being recorded. Cease dangerous indications and alter course immediately. The transmission was repeated in Farsi. The Iranian ship did not answer. Instead, Contact 3 adjusted again, 2 degrees inward, a small turn, a dangerous one. Closest point of approach now 2.9 nautical miles from carrier track, the tactical center reported. Contact 3 still closing. The captain looked toward the air operations officer. Launch CAP. On the flight deck, the first F/A-18 Super Hornet was already waiting on the catapult. Steam curled beneath its fuselage. The pilot sat locked in, visor down, oxygen mask sealed. A deck shooter crouched beside the nose gear, one hand raised, waiting for the final signal. The jet's twin engines glowed in the blue-gray light of dawn. Then the signal came. The shooter dropped his hand. The catapult released. The Super Hornet tore down the deck and climbed into the sky. Seconds later, a second jet followed, rising hard over the carrier's bow. Their afterburners flashed orange against the morning haze as they turned toward the Iranian formation. Nothing was launched from the aircraft. No aggressive pass. Just American air power arriving overhead. At 5:35, the starboard U.S. destroyer made its move. It accelerated slightly and cut across the widening gap between the carrier and the two Iranian vessels pressing closest from the side. The maneuver was precise. Not a charge. Not a threat. A placement. A wall of steel inserted into the one place the Iranian formation needed to keep open. On the destroyer's bridge, the closest Iranian hull was now visible without binoculars. Dark gray, low profile, bow wake rising. Men visible along the deck edge. The Iranian ship's covered forward equipment remained covered, but its radar kept sweeping. Inside the destroyer's tactical center, Aegis tracks multiplied and refined. Track 3 prioritized. Tracks 4 and 5 holding starboard pressure. Track 6 aft. No change. The destroyer's own forward mount rotated a few degrees. Again, not enough to engage, enough to be understood. Above the water, the Seahawk circled wide and low, camera fixed on contact 3. The sensor operator zoomed in on the bridge windows, then the radar mast, then the deck lines. Every second was time-stamped, every movement stored. The helicopter transmitted again. Iranian naval vessel, you are creating a dangerous approach. Alter course now. No reply. At 5:36, the targeting radar profile appeared again. This time slightly longer. The electronic warfare officer did not need to raise his voice. Same contact, same bearing. Targeting a mission confirmed. The captain looked at the tactical screen. Do not respond electronically. Keep recording. That was discipline. The carrier group had the ability to answer with overwhelming electronic pressure. It could confuse systems, flood the spectrum, and place every threatening contact inside a defensive response envelope. But responding too early would give the other side the story it wanted. So the Navy held the line. It let Iran transmit. It let Iran reveal. It let the machines collect everything. At 5:37, the two Super Hornets arrived overhead. They did not dive on the Iranian ships. They did not make an aggressive pass. They established a controlled orbit above and forward of the carrier, high enough to avoid provocation, close enough to be seen by every bridge crew below. From the Iranian decks, the message would have been impossible to miss. The carrier was awake. The escorts were in position. The aircraft were overhead. And the entire formation was being watched from every angle. Contact 3 continued forward for another 20 seconds. Then 30. The range dropped again. 4.2 nautical miles from carrier, the tactical center called. 2.7 from escort. The destroyer held its place. The Iranian ship now faced a choice. Continue inward and force a direct standoff with the escort, or turn away and break the geometry of the ring. For a few moments, nothing changed. Only the sea moved. Only the radar swept. Only the clocks counted down. Then contact 3 reduced speed. Not much. 22 knots became 20. Then 19. The turn came next. 3 degrees outward, small on the screen, huge in meaning. Contact 3 is opening closest point of approach, the coordinator said. Ring integrity weakening. No one celebrated. The captain simply nodded. Keep pressure. Maintain record. Because the situation was not over. 5 Iranian ships were still moving. 2 still held the starboard side. 1 remained aft. The forward ship that had just turned away had not retreated. It had only stopped closing. But the first crack had appeared. The Iranian formation had tried to turn the water around the carrier into a trap. The U.S. Navy answered with sensors, aircraft, escorts, and restraint. It had not overreacted. It had not blinked. It had forced the most dangerous ship in the ring to make the first adjustment. At 5:39, the tactical display showed the new picture. The circle was still there, but it was no longer tightening. The Iranians had built a ring around the carrier. The U.S. Navy had just built a cage around the ring. At 5:40, the ring was still visible. 6 Iranian naval vessels remained around the carrier group, spread across the water in a formation designed to pressure, confuse, and compress. But the shape was no longer clean. One forward ship had slowed, another had widened its angle by a few degrees. The first break had appeared. Now the U.S. Navy moved into it. On the tactical display, the American escorts shifted like pieces on a board. One destroyer held the starboard gap. Another moved aft, placing itself between the carrier and the Iranian vessel trailing behind. A cruiser adjusted forward, widening the screen across the carrier's bow. No ship moved randomly, no ship rushed. Every turn had a purpose. Screen is extending, the coordinator reported. Carrier remains protected on all sectors. The captain watched the Iranian tracks begin to react. That was the key. Until now, Iran had been forcing the geometry. Now the geometry was forcing Iran. At 5:41, the Seahawk dropped lower over the forward sector, holding a wide orbit around the most aggressive Iranian ship. Its sensors were still recording high-resolution video, infrared data, range information, course changes, wake patterns, everything. The sensor operator kept the camera fixed on the Iranian bridge. Bridge crew visible, multiple personnel topside, no visible systems manned. The pilot kept the aircraft steady, not too close, not too high. Close enough to remind the Iranian crew they were being watched. High enough to deny any claim of unsafe flying. The broadcast went out again. Iranian naval vessels, this is a United States Navy aircraft. You are operating in an unsafe formation near a U.S. carrier group. Increase separation immediately. This time there was movement. One Iranian ship on the starboard side reduced speed by 2 knots. Then another, small changes. But in a naval standoff, small changes are how commanders step back without saying they are stepping back. At 5:42, the Super Hornets completed their first orbit. From below, their silhouettes crossed the morning sky in controlled arcs. They did not dive. They did not threaten. They simply stayed overhead, locked into a combat air patrol that turned the water below into a fully monitored space. On the carrier's deck, more aircraft were being prepared, but not launched. That was deliberate. The Navy was showing capacity without flooding the sky. Pressure, not panic. Readiness, not recklessness. At 5:43, the forward U.S. cruiser's radar picture sharpened. 3 Iranian ships were now being tracked in the same defensive sector. Their heading still pointed inward, but their speed no longer matched. The synchronization was slipping. Contacts 1, 2, and 3 no longer maintaining coordinated closure, the tactical center reported. That sentence mattered. A formation only works if every unit holds the plan. Once speed changes, once angles widen, once one captain hesitates while another keeps pressing, the shape begins to fail. The Iranian ring was failing. At 5:44, one Iranian vessel tried to regain pressure. It turned back toward the carrier's projected track, attempting to close the forward gap that had opened moments earlier. The move appeared instantly on every American display. Contact 2, altering inward, possible attempt to reform line. The captain did not look surprised. Shift the destroyer 5 degrees forward. Hold the lane, the destroyer answered immediately. Its bow came left. Its wake widened. Its hull moved into the exact patch of water the Iranian ship needed to occupy. Not fast enough to create reckless pressure, not slow enough to invite it, just precise enough to make the Iranian captain choose. Hold course and create a recorded safety risk or turn away. For 20 seconds, both ships held their lines. The range closed. 3.2 nautical miles, 3.0, 2.8. On the destroyer's bridge, the Iranian ship was fully visible now. Gray hull, flags snapping in the wind, antennas rotating, men moving behind the bridge glass. The destroyer's captain gave no dramatic order. Steady. That was all. At 5:45, the carrier transmitted the final warning of the sequence. Iranian vessels, your formation is creating an unsafe approach around a United States Navy carrier group. Increase distance immediately. Continued closure will be treated as escalatory. The message was repeated in Farsi. This time, the silence did not last. A faint transmission broke through, clipped by static and difficult to read. United States vessel, maintain your current line. We are conducting naval operations. The American reply came back flat. Iranian vessels, your maneuvers are being recorded. You will increase separation, no argument, no negotiation, no change in course from the carrier. At 5:46, Contact 2 turned outward. The destroyer held its lane. The Iranian ship's wake shifted. Its bow opened away from the American formation. The forward gap widened again. Inside the carrier's tactical center, no one celebrated. Operators continued calling ranges. Electronic warfare teams kept logging emissions. The Seahawk remained overhead. The Super Hornets continued orbiting. This was what control looked like. Not noise, not drama. A series of decisions that gave the other side fewer and fewer safe options. At 5:47, the aft Iranian ship began to drop back. It had been holding position behind the carrier like the final piece of the box. Now the range opened from 6 nautical miles to 7, then 7.5. The aft screen reported it first. Contact 6 opening distance. The coordinator looked at the main display. Rear pressure is reducing. That broke the shape. Without the aft ship, the ring was no longer a ring. It was just a loose group of vessels near a carrier group that had regained control of the water around it. At 5:48, the Seahawk completed another orbit and climbed to 500 feet. Its camera captured the entire formation from above. The carrier still moving straight through Hormuz. American escorts spread in disciplined arcs. Iranian ships no longer synchronized, no longer closing as one. The image said more than any radio message could. The attempted enclosure had failed. At 5:49, 3 Iranian vessels had reduced speed. 2 had altered course outward. The last remained near the edge of the American formation, but alone, its position no longer had meaning. A circle only works when every side holds. Iran had lost the circle. The U.S. Navy had not needed to escalate. It used aircraft, escorts, radar, cameras, electronic collection, and command discipline to take back the space one sector at a time. On the carrier's bridge, the captain watched the range rings widen. "Maintain course," he said. The carrier kept moving. Behind it, the white wake stretched clean across the narrow water. At 5:49, the formation broke, not with chaos, with a turn. At 5:50, the radar picture finally began to open. For 33 minutes, 6 Iranian naval vessels had pressed around the American carrier group, shaping the water, narrowing the angles, and testing how much pressure a U.S. carrier would absorb before it reacted. Now the shape was falling apart. One forward Iranian ship had already turned outward. 2 on the starboard side had reduced speed. The vessel trailing behind the carrier was opening distance. The formation still existed on the surface, but it no longer had weight. It no longer controlled the geometry. Inside the tactical center, the display showed what every officer had been waiting for. Contact 1 opening, Contact 2 opening, Contact 6 increasing separation aft. The coordinator looked up from his console. Ring is broken. No one cheered, no one clapped. The carrier kept moving. That was the point. On the bridge, the captain watched the Iranian ships through the forward windows, then shifted his eyes back to the display. The American formation had not changed its mission. It had not reversed course. It had not surrendered the lane. It had absorbed the pressure, documented the threat, and forced the other side to run out of options. "Maintain present course and speed," he said. The helmsman repeated it back. "Maintain present course and speed." Outside, morning light had fully reached the Strait of Hormuz. The dark water was now blue-gray, broken by long white wakes from ships that had spent the last half hour maneuvering within seconds of escalation. The U.S. carrier remained at the center of the scene, massive, steady, and still moving forward. Above it, the Super Hornets held their orbit. Below them, the Seahawk began its final pass. The helicopter's camera captured the Iranian ships one by one. Hull numbers, wake direction, deck activity, radar mass movement, bridge windows. Every piece of the encounter was stored, time-stamped, and ready for review. This was not just observation, it was proof. At 5:52, the nearest Iranian vessel transmitted again. The message was short, clipped, and wrapped in static. United States vessel, Iranian naval units are resuming patrol pattern. The American reply came back immediately. Iranian vessels maintain safe separation from this carrier group. Nothing more, no insult, no victory statement. The Navy did not need one. The water was already saying enough. At 5:55, the Seahawk turned back toward the carrier. Its rotor wash kicked up a thin sheet of spray as it crossed behind the starboard escort. On the flight deck, crews prepared to recover it. The helicopter came in smooth, nose steady, wheels settling onto the deck with a hard metallic thump. A deck crewman moved in low and fast. The aircraft was secured. Mission complete. The Super Hornets stayed airborne. That was deliberate. Even after the ring broke, the Navy did not relax too quickly. Iranian ships were still nearby. Their radars were still active. Their commanders still had choices. A broken formation could reform if the Americans looked away. So they did not look away. At 5:57, the aft Iranian vessel fell beyond 9 miles. The 2 starboard ships widened to the east. The forward contacts no longer crossed the carrier's projected path. For the first time since the encounter began, the carrier had clear water ahead. Inside the tactical center, the watch teams continued working the problem as if nothing had been decided. That was another part of the discipline. The most dangerous minute in any standoff is often the minute after the other side appears to step back. Crews relax. Assumptions creep in. Someone mistakes distance for safety. The U.S. Navy does not train that way. Every Iranian track remained active. Every radar emission was still logged. Every camera stayed pointed outward. At 6 o'clock, the carrier crossed the most constrained section of the transit lane. The passage was not finished, but the crisis had changed shape. The Iranian ships were no longer dictating movement. The escorts had restored the screen. The aircraft had taken the sky. The carrier had kept the lane. The ring had failed, not because it was weak, but because it met a force that refused to react emotionally. That was the difference. Iran had brought numbers, 6 vessels, 6 wakes, 6 angles of pressure. It had created an image designed to look overwhelming from above. A U.S. aircraft carrier surrounded in one of the most sensitive maritime choke points on Earth. But images are not control. Control is what happens when every sensor is working, every radio call is logged, Every aircraft arrives on time, every escort holds its sector, and every commander understands the rules before the first dangerous turn is made. At 6:03, the Super Hornets completed one final circuit over the formation. From their altitude, the picture was clear. The U.S. carrier was pulling ahead. The escorts were spaced cleanly around it. The Iranian vessels were scattered across the water, no longer synchronized, no longer closing, no longer forming anything that could be called a circle. The lead pilot looked down at the strait. No chaos, no smoke, no broken ships, just wakes. Sometimes that is what victory looks like at sea, not destruction, separation. At 6:05, the tactical center recorded the final status. All Iranian contacts opening distance. Carrier group secure. The captain heard the report without turning. Continued transit. The words were simple, almost routine, but nothing about the last 48 minutes had been routine. 6 Iranian naval vessels had tried to compress a U.S. aircraft carrier inside the narrow waters of Hormuz. They had ignored warnings. They had maneuvered aggressively. One had crossed the line with a targeting radar signal. They had tested the carrier, the escorts, the aircraft, the command structure, and the patience of every sailor on watch. The U.S. Navy answered without panic. It answered with radar, aircraft, escorts, recorded evidence, and restraint sharp enough to cut through the pressure. And by the end, the carrier was still moving exactly where it intended to go. The Iranian ships were not. That was the message. So here is the question. If you were standing on that bridge, watching 6 Iranian naval vessels close around your carrier in the Strait of Hormuz, what would you have ordered? Hold course? Launch aircraft earlier? Or respond more firmly the moment the ring began to form? Drop your answer in the comments. Because out here in narrow water, the strongest move is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it belongs to the side that refuses to panic.